Welcome to the Manhattan GMAT Study Hall. This is the October 6th edition, and it's going to be a continuation of our theme from last week, which is critical reasoning problems that have numbers or statistics of some sort. And along the way, what will probably wind up happening is a number of different types of general review of critical reasoning, because as you'll see, as you saw last time if you were there, and as you will see again today, a lot of ostensibly numerical critical reasoning problems are actually not really based on numerical reasoning. They're based on reasoning about things other than numbers. And so in a lot of these cases, basically the numbers are almost a smokescreen for the rest of the reasoning involved. But we will see that as we go. So welcome back, and let's get started. As usual, we have to start with the usual warnings and instructions. If any of you guys are new to this game, this will be the first time. If you are an old veteran of these study halls, then you will probably know the warnings by heart, but still, it's good to know them anyway. The usual warnings. Please don't submit problems that are too general. Remember that these are hour-and-a-half long topic-oriented study halls. So if you ask us for all of geometry at the same time, or if you ask us for the whole test at the same time, which is basically what this is, then we can't really do that, because the GMAT, you can't summarize the whole GMAT in an hour-and-a-half. Also, this is the real big deal here. This is the thing that is probably what people are still doing the most often. Please don't submit problems that are way too specific. I mean, again, we have a forum, and the purpose for the existence of the forum is this, so that we can take specific questions about specific problems and answer them. So if you have a question that is basically just, I don't understand the difference between B and C in problem number whatever, then please post that kind of thing on the forum and not here. We would appreciate that. The study hall is meant to be, the main reason that that's our policy is because the study hall is meant to be something for which the lectures are valuable after the fact. And if all we do in the study hall is just go over random bits of random problems, then the archive would be sort of worthless after the fact, because there would be no way to index the archive sessions and to really say what we cover when. You know, it would just be 42 sessions of random problems. So we want the archive to be something that is valuable to the people viewing it. And this is the main reason why we don't just do one-off random sessions of problems that have nothing to do with each other. So this is why it's really important to have a theme. Okay, so what you should do is give us a topic of some depth that we can legitimately spend all or most of a study hall on. So if you're going to give us specific problems, good. In fact, we would like if you gave us at least one or two specific problems along with your theme. But please relate them to some question that is a little bit more general on which we can actually spend the bulk of a study hall. That's the deal. Also, no personal issues. If you have a study plan issue, or like, here's my scores, or here's whatever else, remember that these things are watched in the long run by thousands of people, and so a single person's issues and scores and stuff like that are not appropriate for this forum, for this arena here, for this study hall. We do have a folder on our forum that is dedicated to that kind of thing. It's called the General Questions folder. The purpose of that folder is exactly these kinds of things: personal study plans, progress, advice, things like that. So go take that over there. Smiley face icon on the left. If you understand these warnings and guidelines and submissions, please click the smiley face. The smiley face looks like this, and it is found on your left. Okay. Also, again, just to recap, you're not allowed to submit problems from the official guide. either here or on the forum. Those are not allowed in either place. So please don't submit them. We will have to ignore them if you do, because GMAC has expressly asked us not to use those. Also, please do not submit single questions without a larger context, as said before. Please post them on the forum. And this was sort of an issue with a couple of submissions last week, but make sure that your submissions are polite and follow the basic rules of business etiquette. As in, please don't be demanding. I mean, remember that this is not only is this a professional relationship, but also it's a free service. So, you know, we get more posts than we should with this tone of like, I expect you to do this topic in a study hall, and it's kind of like, eh. And as I said last week, this is really important, especially from the standpoint of business, which is all about relationships and diplomacy and things like that. So and there may be sometimes language barriers at work here. I understand that a lot of the people who are submitting things like this may not intend to submit them with that sort of tone, but there may be some language barrier or something in the way. But even so, if this happens, it's not a good thing, because if the same thing happened in a business relationship, it could terminate that relationship. So be careful with the way the requests are worded. I mean, if we get something that appears to be basically making demands of us, we will probably just ignore it, because we do get very, very many submissions for the study hall. So we prefer to respond to the ones that are phrased a little bit more professionally. So just keep an eye out for that. Smiley face if you guys understand these things. Smiley face icon. There you go. Okay, good. Finally, please check the archives. At this point, the archives are available. They are free. There are about 45 sessions, give or take a couple at this point. It's a lot of sessions. What this means is if you have a topic in mind, the first thing you should do is search the archive and see if that topic is already in the archive. If the topic is already in the archive, then please watch the session. And if the session covers your concern, then great, everybody's happy. If the session does not cover the specific aspect that you wanted to see, then please, when you submit your request, please tell us what aspect of the problems that you were looking for that you didn't see in the previous session. So there you go. Okay, that is it for the preliminaries. Again, if those of you who are just arriving, here is another quick glance at the topic. It's a continuation of last week's topic, critical reasoning problems with numbers and statistics. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. Remember that when we do problems, please use these answer buttons. The answer buttons should be visible now. You should have just seen them materialize on your board. They are to the left over by the smiley face icons and so on. And please use them, because we don't want people answering questions in the instant message box, because that's not fair to people who have not yet finished the problem. So make sure that when you use these, your answers are invisible until I go ahead and publish the group statistics. So it's anonymous. No one knows who gave what answer. It'll just show up as statistics. Finally, please do not click repeatedly. If you do click more than one time, your answer will disappear the second time. So if you need to change an answer, then click one time on the new letter and we will see that. But please do not click more than one time on the same letter, because if you do, your answer will go away. Smiley face, if you understand the answer buttons. Again, if you are an old timer, you will know this stuff already, but smiley face if this makes sense. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. As a measure of attribution here, all of the problems on the following slide. So all of the problems in today's session are in the GMAT Prep official software. So most of them are problems that we have seen in that software with our own eyes, and the ones that are remaining ones are ones that were submitted from several different parties on the internet as GMAT Prep. So multiple submissions building enough credibility for us to trust that they're on GMAT Prep. So these are all official problems from the free software. Okay, here is the first problem for today. Give it a shot. And here's a timer for you. Okay, guys, that's 2 minutes. This is a relatively short problem, so it shouldn't really take you much longer than that, unless you are newly logged in. So SRI, Mimi just logged in, so Shri, if you can answer the question, that would be fantastic. Okay, here are the class statistics. If you have not answered the problem, make sure that you remember that this is the GMAT. What I mean by that is this is a test where you are not allowed to not answer the problem. So I mean, just a quick note on that. We have a few non-responses here. Again, if you're an old-timer on these sessions, you'll know what I'm going to say. But this is the GMAT. I mean, on the real test, you must answer every question in the order that you see them. So if any of you are abstaining from answering the question, make sure you know that that's a habit that you cannot take onto the real test with you. So that should stop as soon as feasibly possible. You've got to get used to taking a guess if you need to take a guess. Okay, let's talk about this problem. In the instant message box, why don't, first let's hear from people who picked B. What was your justification for picking B? And then we'll take a look most closely at the two most often picked answers. If you are one of the people who picked B, and there should be over 20%, over 25% of everyone. If you're one of the people who picked B, then in the text box, please tell us why. And then we'll ask people who picked D like dog in a second. So I see one person typing, and it's like a tough crowd today. Okay, so let's talk about this problem. People who picked D like dog, what was your justification? Text box, please. Okay, I got a few people typing. Yeah, okay. So let's take a look. I think we've got a couple of justifications in each for each choice. The point that I want to make about these problems is that, remember from last time, if you saw the session last time, we made this point as well. But even when critical reasoning problems are statistical in nature, they are still conceptual. And they want to make sure that you understand the actual ideas behind statistics. So you shouldn't get too swallowed up in numbers themselves. Like the specific values of the numbers are almost never meaningful. What's meaningful is two things. Number one, the relationships between the numbers. So as opposed to the actual values themselves. And then if you have an off-topic question, please be patient. We are not going to interrupt the current discussion to answer it. Thank you. Number one, the relationships between the numbers are meaningful. In other words, the fact that this number is a lot bigger than that number is meaningful. It's not, the 60 by itself doesn't mean anything, and neither does the 10. They're trying to make the point that this is a lot bigger than that. That's the relationship there. It's the actual numbers are basically insignificant. And then also, number two, the possible interpretations. So, like, what might still be unknown? So, I guess what you would call extra variables. Like, what might affect these numbers that hasn't been said? So let's talk about this. These are the two things that are meaningful. Let's take that onto the next page and discuss what these are. So there's that. And then let's move the problem onto this page as well. Okay, I'm going to make your text a little bit smaller so that we can fit some more discussion on the page. So what's meaningful in this problem? Well, what are the relationships? In this case, the relationship is sort of simple. Namely, the percent increase in violent crime is a lot higher in Meadowbrook. So, percent increase in crime is much higher in Meadowbrook. That's all you're supposed to get out of those numbers. But what extra variables are at work here? So let's take a look at the sample of answer choices that you guys, of answers that you guys gave. So here is what one person said. This is from someone who picked answer choice B. So this person is saying, so from a student who selected B, this person is saying that the population itself is an extra variable that matters. So the thought is, the thought here is right, although in this problem that's not true, and we'll see why in a second. But then we also have another couple of people identifying another extra variable. So let me quote a couple of you other guys in the text box. There's a quote. There's another quote. So these are from people who picked D, like dog. These two who picked D. These two individuals have identified the original values, the initial values, if you're a science type, of these quantities as important. So these students have identified the initial or starting values of the quantities as a significant in affecting the problem. So let's take a look, because if the population size itself were a factor, then B would be correct. If the initial values are in play, then D is correct. But let's take a look at what the problem says. The problem says that we are considering violent crime per 1,000 residents, which means that what is not actually a factor. Text box, please. Like, what is the point of giving a per capita rate of something? text box, please. Yeah, per capita rate makes the population size irrelevant. And in fact, that's why real things like crime rates and so on are always expressed as per capita rates. Because if they weren't, then you would just see the biggest crime rates reported for the largest cities. So in order to keep that from happening, you put a rate per 1,000 people. So this is a per capita rate. The point of per capita rates is to get rid of the effect of population size. In fact, you can generalize this. In fact, the point of introducing units of the form unit 1 per unit 2 is generally to take out the confounding effect of unit 2. So, for example, let's say that you, let me add some quote marks to that to make it a little bit clearer. When you have a unit per another unit, this is almost always what you are trying to do with that. So here's another sort of unrelated example. If you are measuring miles per gallon that a car gets, what you're doing is you're trying to give a true measure of how fuel efficient that car is. And if you don't do this per gallon, then the size of the car's fuel tank will start to matter. Like if I say how far can a car go on a whole tank of gas, then it's not just fuel efficiency. I mean, if I have a giant tank that holds 1,000 gallons of gas, then I'm going to have a huge number for that. But for miles per gallon, I still won't. So this kind of unit, if you have these units, then the number of gallons that the tank holds is irrelevant. So the same thing is happening here. When you do a crime rate per 1,000 people or per person, then it means it does not matter how many people are in the city anymore. So this is, in this case, that makes this incorrect. If they did not do a crime rate per 1,000 people or per person, then this answer could be, you could defend this answer. But in this case, not so. Also, choice D, the initial values absolutely are a factor here. Let's copy that again onto another slide. What this person has said, these two people, the initial values definitely matter because we're just talking about percentage increases, but the percentage increase doesn't give us everything we need to know here. So what you also have to do is think about what units that we're really talking about here. Like, more likely to become victims of violent crime is not a percent increase thing. Like, this would be measured by the absolute number of crimes per person or per 1,000 people, etc. So the problem is that percentage increases don't give you absolute numbers unless you know where you are starting from. So unless you know the original values upon which they are compiled. So that's the point. I misspelled unless. Let's fix that. Okay, percent, yeah. So and Curry illustrates this nicely with actual numbers. If your original crime rate was, instead of using percents, let's call these rates per person. 10% would be an awfully high crime rate. But let's say instead of 10%, let's say that this was 10 crimes per 1,000 people. then if it went up by 60%, it would be 16 crimes per 1,000 people. Versus if your initial value in Parkdale was 40 crimes per 1,000 people, then it's still much higher, still indicates a much greater degree of danger. So any questions about this problem, please put them in the text box. Otherwise, we will summarize and move on. Okay, I don't see anybody typing. You have a few moments to type a question if you have one. In general, the takeaway that you should get from this, so a general lesson here is in a problem with units of measure, think about the following things. Population density, we'll get to that in a second. In problems with units of measure, make sure if quantities are given if quantities are given without units, such as more likely to become victims in this problem, then please try to quantify those quantities. In other words, actually give them units. So, because otherwise it seems to be more ambiguous than it is. Like, this is something that would be measured as the crime per 1,000 people without percentage growth, just absolute crime per 1,000 or per person, and that's something that you need to think about. Also, the other thing is, if you do have units, when you are given units, make sure you notice the relationships that are present between and among those units, and also think whether any considerations are missing, such as the initial values here. Okay, there's a couple of questions in the text box. Let's look at those really quickly. One person is asking, what does population density mean? Population density means the number of people living in some fixed unit of area. So pop density is number of people per unit of area. For instance, people per square mile. So this is irrelevant in this problem because nothing is quantified by area. So in this problem, nothing varies according to area. So population density is irrelevant because we're just talking about for the city as a whole. So if people cluster themselves in a smaller area of downtown, these figures don't really affect much. And then expenditures, what one person is asking in two rather interesting parts. It's an interesting way to divide that message. Looks like you typed enter by accident. One person asks this, and the answer is because it has nothing to do with what's in the passage. So the passage is only concerned with crime rates and with the likelihood of crime, which is also governed by crime rates. So expenditures don't have anything to do with it. I mean, there are, I'm not really sure how to explain beyond that. I mean, expenditures don't affect the passage in any way. There's no connection. I mean, there's lots of things that have to do with crime that have nothing to do with this problem. For instance, public opinion about crime would also be irrelevant for the same reason. Like, if people feel like they are in more danger because the news has sensationalized a bunch of reports of crime, then great, but that wouldn't affect this problem either. So, okay. Finally, somebody was asking, because these problems are from GMAT Prep, so someone asked this question right here. right there. Show up on your board in a second. You know, if you remember, I mean, GMAT prep contains about 900 problems. So if you've just watched a couple of study halls, the effect will be minimal. Remember, though, that the main point of a practice test is not to get a score. Like, I know that a lot of people are not down with that kind of thinking, but remember that the score is not the most important thing about a practice test. In fact, if you are not very, very close to your real exam, it's the least important thing. So what matters on practice tests is the weak areas that are diagnosed and the opportunities for review and study. So those are unaffected by scoring factors. Like if you learn from doing practice problems and the only negative of that is that you have a little bit of a distortion of your practice test score, that is well worth it. So just make sure you know that. Okay. Also, before we move to the next problem, let's see, give me 10 seconds here. Let's see, okay, here we go. One person asked, and I mean, people ask this from time to time. I know if you're an old timer here, you'll already know what my answer is to this, but the answer is do not worry about this and do not ever worry about this. So it can't help, it cannot possibly help you. The only people who care about difficulty levels of problems are people who write tests. So here in the chat box and in the real window, here's a blog post that we wrote about this topic. But thinking about difficulty level can hurt you in very many tangible ways and cannot possibly help you in any way at all. So it's important to just stop thinking about it completely. Like the only reason that we talk about it in our classes and stuff is to justify the strategies that you need to use on the test. So the existence of that kind of stuff explains why certain strategies differ from the traditional test-taking strategies, you might call them. But once you know what the strategies are, it's irrelevant. So just make sure you guys aren't, and I mean all of you out there, make sure that you are not only are not asking about this, but not even ever thinking about it. If you are thinking about difficulty level, then you are taking mental brain capital away from things that you should be thinking about, i.e. paying less attention to the stuff that matters. So it's a very strong point to make. Okay, let's move on to the next problem. I've cleared your answers. Here is the next problem. Here's a timer. Okay, it looks like we still have a number of non-responses here. Remember that non-response is not an option that you have on this test. So if you are one of the non-responses, then please step up to the plate and pick an answer in the next 10 seconds. Thank you. Okay, let's take a look. Here are your statistics as a group. We still have one of the ones that shows as non-response is me. So when it shows 2 non-responses, that means that there's actually 1. If that's you, then make sure that you answer the question next time. Let's take a look. what are the units in the problem? Well, remember what we're looking at. What are the quantities? How are they related? And what do they mean? So the units are, in these statements, you have percentages of profits. And then they contribute this conclusion that the pharmaceutical division is growing stronger. So I did not need to put that last blue mark on there. Okay, so remember what we said last time. When you have quantities given without units, in the last problem we remarked, if you have quantities given without units, the first thing you have to do is quantify. Because in a lot of cases, that's going to be a significant factor in play here. So the blue thing the blue thing says the pharmaceutical division is growing stronger. How would you guys quantify that? Text box, please. What units would you give that? Like, how would you measure stronger? Because, like, one thing, even if you are not terribly mathematically gifted, one thing that they really expect people to be able to do is understand how to measure things. Because, you know, you guys are going to be business managers, and even if you are not math nerd geniuses, you still need to understand what are valid ways of measuring things and what are not. So, yeah, profits, or like actual profits. So probably maybe revenues, but actual profits, or maybe revenues. Not profits as a percentage of the whole corporation's profits. So there's a clash between the orange units and the blue units, in the sense that the orange units are percentages of a larger total that has other moving parts, whereas the blue is a suspicion that the actual performance of the pharmaceutical division has gone up. So if you watched the last session, then you're going to remember this box of text. So I'm just going to repost it here for everybody's benefit. Here's something we gave you last time to chew on and digest. Percentages are not numbers. So if a percentage of something goes up, like percentage of something, like here, these things are percentages of the corporation's profits as a whole, then that doesn't mean an absolute increase. Number one, you should be aware of this in the first place. But number two, more to the point, if they test you on component percentages, then this is probably what they're getting at. So if they ask you a question about component percentages, this is probably the point. Very often the point. I'll take out probably because I'm making bets on whether it's 50%. But I mean, this is very often the point of what they are trying to do. They're trying to make sure you understand that that doesn't mean absolute growth. So, like, let me give you another illustration before we go back to this particular problem. Here's an illustration that is quite literally closer to home. Here is an illustration that is closer to home. Let's say that a family makes $100,000 per year and spends $1,000 per month on food, including both groceries and restaurant food. So in this case, the food budget is 10% of the family's total budget. So food is 10% of the family's budget. On the other hand, now let's say in the following year, the family's primary breadwinner becomes unemployed, so laid off or whatever else, and so the family only makes $25,000 that year. So the family cuts back on it's actually 12% because it's this is per month. So this is 12,000. This is 12,000 for the year. That's what I'm sorry about that. So 12% of the budget. If somebody, thanks for calling out the percentage, but if you said 1%, that also means you got to pay attention to units a little bit more carefully because they might switch you back and forth to make sure you're paying attention. It's more of a quant thing, but still, you never know when they're going to pull that on you. In the following year, family's primary breadwinner gets laid off. Family only makes $25,000, so they stop eating out as much. And so they only spend $500 per month on groceries, on food, not more. So, well, I mean, we have an obvious decrease in the amount of money spent on food, but if you look at percentages, look at what happens. In this case, you have a total of $6,000 on food out of $25,000. So that's 24% of the budget now. So you can see what the issue is here. So remember this kind of example when you look at percentages of a larger component. Because if you have other components that are moving around, then percentages can be a very deceptive way of looking at things. Because in this case, it looks like the family is splurging on food if you just look at percentages. But then if you realize that the overall budget is contracting dramatically, that we don't have that. We have in actuality, they cut their food spending by half. But as a percentage of the larger whole, it's larger. So if we look at this, we can kind of see what's going on here. We have these percentages. If the overall profit has contracted dramatically, then these percentages may be deceptive. For the same reason that those grocery percentages in the other example, I think they don't really mean a lot until you have a sense of the performance of the other components. And they're even hinting at the fact that overall profit has contracted. For instance, this department used to account for 60% of the corporation's profits, and it is having a very bad year. So the majority contributor of profits is suffering. So that means you probably have, I mean, this is a very extreme example just to make a point, but you probably have at least somewhat of this effect going on. And so that's a serious issue here. So in particular, it's this. The percentage may have gone up even if that division has not improved in the same way as just as the family's spending on food went down, even though that spending went up as a percent of income. So there you go. We'll come back to other answer choices in a second, especially answer choice E, which a lot of people picked. But the other point that I want to make about this is that you guys should do it. What I mean by that is you should try to make, the answer is C, you should try to make your own analogies for all critical reasoning problems. In other words, try to think of analogous situations in which the same sort of phenomenon is present. Same sort of phenomenon occurs, but in which the objective subject matter is different. So that's the kind of reasoning that you really need. Like, if you can only think of this in terms of pharmaceuticals and chemical departments, and you can't also use this kind of reasoning and think of other situations, then that means that you are not thinking of this in the right way. It means that you're trying to think of memorization and rules and things like that. You got to be able to abstract this kind of reasoning and port it over to other situations. And a good way to practice doing that is to make your own analogies for the problems. The other fringe benefit of doing that is that it will make the problems themselves a lot easier to understand. Because if you can make this analogy, then you can also make that one. E says the information cited does not make it possible to compare the performance of these divisions in terms of the percent of total profits attributable to each. If people picked this, it looks like the word terms here is missing. I copied and pasted this from a compilation of problems, so there shouldn't be too many typos, but it looks like this should say in terms of. This is a statement that's true, but it's not a critique of the argument. Like, this statement may be true. In other words, we don't have the after percentages for the chemical division. But it's not the problem. It's not the issue at hand. In other words, even if you had another number for the chem division, like even if I said it went down from 60 to 30, you still wouldn't. That's not the issue. The issue is that they are claiming that the pharmaceutical division grew stronger, but this is the reason why it didn't. So most importantly, make sure that you make analogies. I mean, when you can't do this on the spot while you are solving the problem. This is something that you want to do later. But at the same time, it is definitely something that you should do. Okay, I see a couple of other people typing questions. So let's see what you guys are typing. If I know the other percent, I can compare who performed better. No, you still can't, because it would still not remember that you're not focusing on the point of the argument here. So before you start any of these problems, I mean, let's analyze this real quick. Before you start any critical reasoning problem with an argument, make sure that you understand absolutely 100% the point that the argument is trying to make. So the point that the argument is trying to make here is that the pharmaceutical division has experienced absolute growth. So The argument is trying to assert that the pharma department has experienced absolute growth, because that's the only reasonable way to interpret that blue statement up there, and that's the conclusion of the argument. So one student is typing the following, and I mean, I can see what you're talking about, but it still doesn't address the issue, because even if you know all of the percentages as hard numbers, so Farah, yeah, that's basically a summary of what we said before, and that's correct. The problem here is that even if you have all the numbers, they don't address absolute growth. Like, even if you know that chemical used to be 60% and now it's 40%, and even if you know that pharma used to be 20 and is now 45, it doesn't make any difference, because none of these numbers mean anything in terms of absolute growth unless you have some sort of relationship to the total budget. So it's kind of like this. This family spent more percent of money on food and less percent of money on, presumably on things like entertainment and whatever. But even if I have all of the percentages that this family spent on everything, they still don't mean anything at all until I tell you that the overall income went from 100,000 to 25,000. So the same thing is happening in this case. Like, E is not the issue, and even if you give all of the percentage information, you still have this major issue still sitting there. So, okay. I think that takes care of it. I don't think anybody else is typing anything else. So let's look at something else. Let's try this. Okay, I'm going to clear your answers out. Here's a timer. Go. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are missing a few answers from a few individuals. Remember, even if you are guessing, you still have to put an answer down. So if you are, there's Amar, but Amar appears to be having technical issues. There's Mohammed, there's Venche. If you are one of those three people, please answer the problem. Okay, so it looks like fewer people had issues here. So this one, the solid majority answer here is the right one. But let's review anyway for the benefit of everyone and also for future people watching. So Denoma had a sizable decline in sales revenue. So this is overall sales revenue. The result appears surprising because electronics retailers report that although their overall sales were considerably lower than in the previous year, their sales revenue from Denoma models actually grew. So the first thing here is we need to figure out what's going on. So this time we don't have any shifting sands of things like percentages. Like these purple things really are numbers that are the same unit. So in this case, there's not a lot of voodoo that can happen here. In other words, total sales revenue for Denoma went down, but the sales revenue from their models at retailers went up. So these really are sales revenue. This is adding and subtracting. It's just credits and debits kind of thing. So there's no percentages, there's no proportions, there's not really anything of that sort. So what this problem reduces to, like the only way that this can happen is if something else went down and countered that effect. So like sales, some other component of Denoma's sales revenue must have gone down. And it must have gone down by quite a bit, because this is one component of that revenue, this sales revenue from the models at retailers. That went up, but their overall combined sales of everything went down. So something else they sell must have taken a big hit. So this doesn't affect that, because this is not anything that's sold. These are in percentage terms, but they don't tell you anything about Denoma. This is it because this is another component of sales revenue. So if other manufacturers' models sales went down, which is certainly likely given this climate of sales here, this would explain it. So if sales of these components went down by enough, it would offset sales of Denoma models. So that's the answer we want. D, this would be quite the opposite. If D were true, if Denoma had no other sales, then it would just make this paragraph a lot harder to understand. I mean, as opposed to resolving it, D would actually make the paragraph even more perplexing than it already is, because D would take away ways of explaining this. And then finally, E, it doesn't really matter how they sold this, because we are just talking about straight numbers. So even if the models were sold at discount rates, the numbers are what the numbers are. And in fact, the total revenue from these things still went up. So even if they were occasionally sold at discount prices, they still made more revenue from them. And that's still a positive number in the revenue department. Any questions, type them in the text box. Somebody's asking, are these real GMAT problems? They are all from the official GMAT prep software. That's the free software at mba.com, which consists of, in their words, it consists of retired problems from the official test. So yes, these problems should be official. Any questions? If not, we will move on to another problem. Okay, no one is typing. So let's look at this one. Again, please answer using the answer buttons. Thank you. Here's a timer. Okay, everybody, please pick something, and please do so soon. Okay, looks like Zyko or Zico, I don't really know how to say that exactly. Okay, everybody has an answer. So we're kind of all over the place here, but let's look. There's a peak at C, which happens to be the correct answer, although that's still only 1/3 of the people here. So let's take a look. 20 years ago, Balzania put in place regulations requiring operators of surface mines to pay for the reclamation of mined out land. Since then, reclamation technology has not improved. So what they're doing here is they're taking away a confounding variable. You just keep reading, but make sure you know that improving technology can't be a factor anymore. Yeah, the average reclamation cost per mine is only about $4 per ton of coal, which is less than half what it used to be. So the $4, again, doesn't matter. What matters is that it's less than half. So the average reclamation cost per mine, what they're doing per ton of coal, remember what we said about per units. They're trying to take away other things that may have been a confound. So per ton of coal, what this means is that it's kind of like when you have crime rates per 1,000 people, it takes away the number of people as a factor. So it takes away the size of a city. This takes away the total volume. This takes away the effect of the total volume of the mine. Like, in other words, if today's mines are smaller, that's no longer a factor. So like without this, smaller mines would lower the number. But if it's per ton of coal, then they don't. So what we have is the average cost to reclaim a mine, which means to fix the land, has gone way down. So the average cost of reclaiming, which means repairing the land, the mined land, has gone way down. But this decrease is not because the technology has become more efficient. So what we need something else that is not an increase in efficiency that would explain this. So again, make sure a lot of this just falls under the, it's going to sound kind of like common sense when I say it this way, but a lot of it falls under the rubric of make sure you know what you want to find before you go around trying to find it. And I think a lot of people who have trouble with these questions have trouble because they don't really know what they're trying to find when they go around trying to find stuff. So what do we want? Well, what we want is we want some other reason why reclaiming or repairing the land has gotten cheaper. That's what we want. Again, make sure you establish this before you start diving into your options on these kinds of problems. So, even after they started requiring them, coal mines continued to be less expensive to operate than in any other country. We don't care about other countries. So the argument is only concerned with Balzania, with costs within Balzania. So comparisons with other countries are not relevant to this argument. In the 20 years since the regulation took effect, the use of coal as a fuel, this does not affect the cost of reclaiming mines. I mean, this might affect, the supply and demand curve of coal itself, but so this may affect coal prices, but can't reasonably affect the price of reclaiming the mines. C, basically what this says in fewer words is that the people who mine the coal have stopped mining in the areas where it costs the most to reclaim. So this explains the situation perfectly. So, like, they don't have to reclaim the mines that are most expensive to reclaim anymore. So now, that's the situation now. So that would definitely lower your average cost. Because it's an average. So if you take out the most expensive anything, then you're going to lower the average. Like same thing if you take out the super advanced microsurgeries that are on the cutting edge of medicine, then the average cost of surgery will go down too. So this is a perfect explanation. D, even after they, so C is going to be it. That's going to be the one that we want. But let's look at the other two choices anyway, because people did pick them. Even after Balzania began to require surface mine operators to pay reclamation costs, they continued to produce coal at a lower total cost. Again, we're only concerned with the cost of reclamation. The cost of coal production is actually irrelevant. So, cost of coal production doesn't matter. Because reclaiming the mine is something that you do when you are done mining the coal. So there's not even a relationship there. Like if the cost of producing coal goes up or down or whatever, that doesn't affect the cost of fixing the land when you're done. And then as compared to 20 years ago, a greater percentage of the coal, this is irrelevant to reclamation costs. So really what a lot of this is, and this is definitely not unique to quantitative problems, although quantitative problems happen to be today's theme. But really what's going on here is that one of the biggest issues that people have in critical reasoning is people don't really pay attention to what they're supposed to find. Like, don't start examining answer choices until you know what you are looking for. Because otherwise what people do is they invent these elaborate connections between things that are not real. You know, like if people are just swimming through answer choices, they might just start making up connections that don't really exist. It happens a lot. One user is asking, what is the conclusion of an argument? This is not an argument. This is an explain the discrepancy type of problem. Which of the following most helps to account for the drop in reclamation costs? So these kinds of questions don't give you arguments. They just give you sets of facts and then ask you to, something is weird about those facts and you have to pick whatever outside information helps rectify that weirdness. Yeah, you should check out the question first because the question will give you guidance as to what you are doing and not doing with the passage. Absolutely, you should check out the question first, at least briefly. Because draw the conclusion, for instance, if you see it's not this problem, but if you see what conclusion can we draw, then you know that you have to nitpick at facts and things like that. If you see find the assumption, you know you have to like think about what's missing from the argument. If you see, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, the question will definitely give you an insight into how to read the passage and what to concentrate on, because that's where you get the whole idea of how you should be reading it. Okay, someone is typing, so let's wait and see what that person is typing, and then we will look at probably one more. If you don't understand the structure or meaning of a passage. If you don't understand the meaning of a passage, then what that probably means is that your comprehension of written English is not good enough for this test. Because the meanings of the passages are usually pretty clear. Like sometimes it's easy to get lost in the configuration of the passage or the way the logic that relates to statements may not be super immediately obvious until you think about it for a little bit. But if the actual meaning of the passage is a mystery, then that might be a good indicator that you might want to defer the whole task of this test and get better at reading and understanding this level of professional English before you return to it. Another indicator of that is if you consistently don't understand what CR passages are saying. So if both of these indicators are present, like if you just don't understand the meaning of the passage, and if you have a hard time understanding what reading passages are saying, then that probably means that you should just stop studying specifically for the test and just immerse yourself in the world of professionally written English for a while and just get better at it, so that you can come back and not waste a bunch of problems with non-comprehension. So, the GMAT will always still be there, and business schools will be there. So if you're at a point where actually understanding the written English is the issue, you should tackle that first. So, if you don't understand how the argument works, then that may mean you're trying to use rules too much, in which case you should use a little bit more common sense reasoning, which is the root of the problem in a lot of people's cases, that they're not thinking like normal real world people about these things. But if you are honestly just super amazingly confused, then yeah, you should drop in and guess. So, this is the kind of test where you can miss lots and lots and lots of problems. And so if you have to guess every now and then, it's not going to hurt you. Okay, I hope it's a complete answer to that question. Yeah, okay, this looks like another user typed something. Yeah, so like I said at the end, yeah, if it's a single question, it will not make or break your entire performance. Okay, let's look at one more. Let me decide. We have two more left in the slide, so let me decide which one. Okay. So here we go. Last problem of the day. Okay, let's close it. Please pick something. If you are, let's see, okay, I think everybody but Muhammad. Muhammad is away. So let's post your answers. There you go. So it looks like this one's a toss between A and C. Let's check it out. So, for the first time in history, more TVs than people can be found in American households. Blah, 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 blah numbers. These numbers don't help you because they just are the same as the statement that came before them. However, by employing costly manufacturing processes, televisions are becoming too expensive. As a result, the average number of residents per household will again surpass the number of televisions. So this is what we have to support. Like, we just need additional evidence. And notice that unlike weakening, when you support, you don't have to support the current line of argument. All you have to do is just support the conclusion. So we need more evidence that that either like one of these two things, like either A, residents per household will go up, or B, the number of televisions will go down. So either one of these would be legitimate. If you have evidence that the number of residents per household will actually go up, then that would also support the conclusion. If you have evidence that the number of TVs will decrease, that will also support the conclusion. So choice A, house parties at which numerous individuals gather have increased a lot during the past year. The problem with A is that it doesn't give you any reason to suspect that people are buying fewer televisions. Like A is irrelevant unless you make the rather far-fetched assumption that people will stop buying televisions just because they go to other people's house parties. So that's not really reasonable. In fact, you may even take choice A to weaken the argument, because if the number of these house parties has been going up, then that might even give you evidence that people will buy more televisions. So this is not a good answer choice to pick. So this choice may even weaken the argument. This 300% increase will incentivize people to buy more TVs in many cases. So, but it definitely won't decrease the number of TVs. The only way that it could decrease the number of TVs is if you actually assume that people will get rid of their television just because their friend has house parties. And I mean, a big thing about these problems is that you have to use common sense. And I made this point in previous lectures too, but in evaluating assumptions and effects and so on, you must use common sense to judge whether the reasoning is likely in the real world. So like if you're thinking about this from a pure logic standpoint, like you're a machine logic processing system, then choice A, this objection with choice A might seem fine. It might be like, oh, well, if people just go watch TVs on other people's sets, then they might not buy one. But in the real world, that's just not reasonable. Like people who go watch TV at their friends' parties are not going to get rid of their own TV as a result. So there's no hard logic proof of that. It's basically common sense, and you do have to think that way. B, more than 1 million legal immigrants enter the U.S. each year. The problem with this is that the passage talks about residents per household and not total residents. So the entrance of immigrants into the country will not increase the number of residents per household unless A, they move into other people's houses, which is unlikely, or B, we assume that they have more people packed into their house than normal people do. Or not normal people, like people who are already in the country. So there's no reason to assume these things. So B is incorrect because B doesn't address the per household issue. C is actually saying that these people are going to replace televisions with these things as a primary source. So video enabled and primary source. That means that the televisions will no longer be a primary source for these people, which means they will buy fewer of them. So C is what we want. C will, if it comes to fruition, will decrease the number of televisions that are sold because people are replacing them with these personal digital thingies. So, as a primary source of entertainment. Nobody picked D and E, so probably don't have to spend a lot of time on those. D is irrelevant because we only care about the case of televisions. Even if the trend is general, then we don't care. And E is also irrelevant because the argument is just about whether people buy televisions or not. So, and in fact, E would work against the argument. Because if TVs have things that people normally associate with other devices, then this makes it likely that people will purchase TVs instead of buying those devices. So E will probably make the number of TVs increase. Okay, that's it. If you have any quick questions, fire away. Otherwise, we are basically done for the night. So thank you for coming. If you have any quick administrative questions, fire away. Otherwise, good night and good luck. See if anybody has questions. Let's see. Okay, hold on just a second, guys. Okay, someone says, please look into the posting of the prior session. Yeah, at the beginning of the class, I already said that I would do that, so I will still do that. I have not forgotten about that in the last hour and a half. So, in fact, I already sent an email. Somebody says, the phrasing of this particular question is interesting. Do I recommend being good enough on test day? Well, I would always recommend being good. Generally, it's a good idea to be good. In general, though, I don't think that you need to take notes or diagrams for most passages. You shouldn't have to, because most passages should be relatively straightforward to understand. So, that apostrophe is in the wrong place. And there's a distinct disadvantage of notes, which we'll get to in a second. But let me give you a pro and con here after I respond to something else. Just a sec. Okay. So, in response to this question here, it depends. It depends on the individual, but a couple of things to consider here. Pro of taking notes and con of taking notes. And then I'll give you a sort of overall opinion here. I mean, it's okay to take notes if a passage confuses you, or if it is full of specifics, like quantitative things are things on which you might want to take notes more often than usual that require nuanced attention, then take notes. But what I would say is if you actually have to take notes to understand most of these passages, then your comprehension of the general written English format is not where it should be for a test like this. So if you actually find that you need notes on most critical reasoning passages, then you should probably take a break from the GMAT and improve your general ability to read and understand professionally written English. Because these arguments, for the most part, are not intended to be difficult to comprehend. I mean, what's intended to be the challenge is the way in which the arguments interact with the answer choices. Like, if you have to find the assumption, then the difficulty is finding the assumption. But if you have to make extensive notes on the argument in the first place, and if you have to do that over and over and over and over, then that seems to be a big red flag as far as your ability to comprehend goes. So, the pros and cons of taking notes in general. One big pro is that it sometimes aids your comprehension. And I think the most important pro here is that it keeps your head in the game. It keeps your attention. Because remember, the verbal section is at the end of the test. And so you're going to be, your brain is going to be practically dead by this point. So I think that's actually the most important role played by notes, is they just keep you from completely losing all of your attention. On the other hand, the cons that people don't think about, note-taking can actually impede comprehension. In other words, it can actually get in the way of it. Like, specifically, if you write down a bunch of facts, then you will probably be less likely, not more likely, to understand the relationships between those facts. And that's dangerous. Like, for example, if you, like, a couple of the problems that we saw today are like, this percent is this number and this percent is that number. And if you just copy down those percentages, you're probably a lot more likely to think about those as random percentages, and ironically less likely to think of the relationship between them. So this is a big thing. And also it takes a tremendous amount of time. It takes a lot longer than just reading through the passages and comprehending them. So these are your pros and cons here. Obviously there will probably be a couple of arguments on which you should write down a couple of things. I'm not saying that you should never take any notes. But at the same time, if you find that you are taking notes on like half of all passages, then that is problematic. So, should you draw a grid? A grid for critical reasoning? What kind of grid? What do you mean by a grid? I think this is the last question, by the way, that I can take. I have to go. I wouldn't make anything that I would call a grid, but let's see. What I don't understand that you are saying here is the take too long part. Like, if for a verbal problem, all you need is this. All you need is all you need is like A, B, C, D, E, and then just cross stuff out. So, something like that. This complaint seems to be a little bit frivolous to me, in the sense that, but she didn't say that. She wrote choices A through E. So doing this would take me a maximum of about 1.5 seconds. So and you did say this is what you were talking about. So unless there's some sort of misunderstanding, I mean, how long can it take a person to write 5 letters down on a piece of paper? So, I mean, I think you're worrying about something that just isn't worth worrying about at all. I mean, it's like 2 seconds maximum. So, perspective people. Okay, I'm going to run here, but let's see. I think that's all the questions. So, thank you. Remember to keep a perspective on this kind of stuff. I mean, it is, if you have the personality where you worry a lot about minor things, make sure that you think about whether things really are issues or not before you think about, like make sure you don't correct things that are not in need of correction in the first place. Okay, we're done. Take it easy. I am going to turn off the microphone and close the session here in a moment. And good night and good luck. Thank you.